During the 1960s and 1970s, a serial murderer terrorizes secluded areas near San Francisco, California. The media was instantly captivated, and the relationship between killer and media and law enforcement had never been seen before. He began sending taunting messages to both police and newspapers after his first murder. He infamously sent a cipher that said, "This is the Zodiac speaking." You're listening to the Mysterious Brews podcast, and tonight we bring you an interview with one of the case breakers who may have actually deciphered the identity of the Zodiac killer. Welcome to a deep, dark, dank, moist basement somewhere in the bowels of Georgia. No crazy step opening tonight because stereo can't go into mono or mono can't go into stereo or whatever. We have secured an interview with Miss Jennifer Bucholtz, who is one of the Casebreaker team members who may have cracked the identity of the Zodiac killer. Before we bring her on, Jennifer Bucholtz is a former U.S. Army counterintelligence agent and a decorated veteran of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, Master of Arts in Criminal Justice, and Master of Science in Forensic Sciences. Jennifer is currently a professor of forensics and criminal justice at American Military University, as well as an advisor for the university's cold case team. Additionally, she is an instructor for the Department of State's Office of Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program and a licensed private investigator in the state of Colorado. She has an extensive background in investigative reporting and forensic analysis. Bucholtz has also worked for the Arizona Department of Corrections and Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City. We now bring you the interview with Jennifer Bucholtz, Rob from Cigar Store Idiots, and the lovable Coach. Thank you and enjoy. All right, so today we have Miss Jennifer Bucholtz from the Case Breakers with us, and she found herself in an extraordinary position, and I'll let her explain how this all came about. But the cool thing is, I mean, you're like every true crime junkie's dream now. I mean, you cracked the biggest unsolved case there is.
Well, we hope we did. We're working on confirmation for that, and I can explain what we're doing to confirm or refute our
Well, you
conclusions.
certainly got closer to solving it than we have.
Yeah. So how did you find yourself working with the Case Breakers, or actually, how did you find yourself wrapped up in this case?
Well, it goes back a couple years to a case that I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with because you did a recording on it, but the unsolved murder of Rebecca Gould out of Melbourne, Arkansas. And that one, I mean, I kind of fell into that one too, but I wrote a long series of articles on Rebecca's case, and one of them had to do with using behavioral profiling or behavioral analysis in homicide investigation. And I had mentioned Zodiac in my article because he's fairly unique in that he sent a bunch of taunting letters to police. So that was, part of his, more of his signature aspect, I would say, not necessarily MO. But anyways, so a newscaster by the name of Dale Julin emailed me after I wrote that article, after I published it. And he, wrote me this long email explaining how he'd done about 7 years of work on the Zodiac case, and he thought he'd figured out who the perpetrator was, and he'd actually written up a manuscript for a book, and he wanted me to read it and provide my honest feedback. And I mean, naturally, I was skeptical. And let me just say, I'm not a Zodiac buff by any means. Obviously I know the case fairly well now, but I still can't recite every single date and location and victim. But a few years ago, I had read a couple books on it, seen the movie. That was about the extent of my knowledge. So, and I kind of thought I thought they already identified the guy, So then I did some research. I'm like, oh no, actually they haven't. So anyways, Dale, I said, yeah, send me your manuscript. When I have time, I'll take a look at it. It took me a few weeks to get to it, but when I started reading it, it was compelling, and I ended up reading it pretty much all in one sitting. And we'll get into more detail, I'm sure, but by the end of his manuscript, I mean, I was like, this has to be it. I mean, this has to be the guy. Everything is falling in place here. Everything makes sense. And Dale took such a unique approach to the case that nobody else had ever taken. That was another reason where I was like, oh, what he did actually makes total, complete sense to me. So, you know, we got on the phone for a while, and I was like, well, what's your end goal, I guess? And he's like, well, you know, I've tried to get meetings with law enforcement in California and the FBI, and of course nobody will listen to me or look at my findings. And he was like, I was hoping, since you have, you know, your former military and you've worked with other like FBI agents and you teach now at American Military University in forensics, like maybe you'd have some connections that could help me out. And I said, well, let me think this through and think about who I can contact, you know. And it took a while, but eventually I got in touch, or was put in touch with a guy named Eric Kleinsmith, who worked at AMU in a different department than me, but he's also former Army counterintelligence like me. We connected, and then he ended up connecting me with Tom Colbert, and he's the guy that heads up the Case Breakers and started that nonprofit about 10 years ago. And I mean, I had never even heard of the Case Breakers before all of this, but eventually I got on the phone with Tom, and I kind of gave Dale a spiel for him. I said, would you be willing to look at this manuscript? Because I think there's a lot of validity to it. And he said, yeah, sure. You know, same thing as me. He's like, send it my way, I'll get to it. Well, he read it that weekend and called me back. He's like, oh my gosh, I think Dale got it. And I said, okay, well, it's nice to hear the validation, you know, because that's how I feel too.
Right.
And that's how this ball got rolling.
So with not being, you know, kind of, I guess, not being as familiar with the Zodiac case as everybody else, I mean, you kind of come into it with no bias. And like you said,
absolutely,
you know, I know that would help, you know, because there's a lot of people that are, you know, one camp, you know, I think this guy did it, or I think, you know, he started way back when. And I just found it very interesting with the way that it kind of lined up with how, what was the guy's name that y'all had identified?
We think it's a guy by the name of Gary Francis Post.
Post, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was in the area along with, was he, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I read somewhere, was he like he traveled some? Is that how he was, or was he based out of San Francisco?
So he primarily lived in the San Francisco Bay Area after he separated from the Air Force.
Okay.
But his last duty station was Vandenberg, which is, I would consider it Central California, but I guess it's kind of more Southern, but he was stationed there last. But he was also in the Riverside area around 1966, and he was receiving treatment at a hospital near Riverside. So we can place him in the locations of Sherry Jo Bates, which is a very controversial victim, unfortunately, in this whole situation. We can talk about her too, but we can place him there at the time she was killed, as well as place him up in the San Francisco Bay Area for the other Zodiac killings. So that is, I mean, it's obviously circumstantial, but that is just one piece of the pie that we have been able to nail down. So, and once he, you know, separated from the military, finished his treatment or whatever it was down near Riverside, he moved up to the San Francisco Bay Area and then to the High Sierras, but stayed in those two locations for the rest of his life.
Now, was there any validity to, what was it? Somebody in one of their findings had said that they thought he had used the Air Force wing walker boots, and that ties into his, obviously it ties into his Air Force background. But there was that early outlier case that she was killed outside of that library. Were you able to tie him to that area as well?
Yes. Yeah, that's the Sherry Jo Bates murder in Riverside. And
okay.
Yes, that's the year he was receiving treatment 15 minutes away from where she was killed. So yeah, that would place him in the area. And yeah, so there's been those wing walker boot prints found at more than one Zodiac scene, but also Sherry Jo Bates's scene, size 10, and that is the size that Gary Post wore. And we have, I guess you call it confirmation, but from someone who knew him very, very well, saying that those were the boots he wore most often. And particularly when he was an outdoorsman, he was kind of a survivalist. He liked to go live off the land for days or weeks on end and stuff. And that was his favorite style or, you know, make and model of boot to wear. And he wore a size 10. So again, circumstantial, but it's just another thing that does not eliminate him, if that makes sense.
Right. It just adds validity to his situation.
Yeah.
When you get into the confirmed kills, like with Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, I know that since it was an active case, that they kind of kept a lot of things close to the vest. As a unit, were y'all able to kind of look at that and kind of tie him to that crime scene, or was it more or less he's in the area?
Geographically, we can place them in the area. There, with each of his crime scenes, there are obviously some similarities and some differences. But something that's kind of unique about him is his MO would change. He didn't always use, a 9mm, for example. He chose different methods of murder for different scenes. And me personally, I tend to think that it's because this was more of like a personal challenge to him than it was the traditional compulsion that most serial killers have, where it's sexually based. With Zodiac in general, no matter who it is, it doesn't appear that there was much of a sexual compulsion behind these crimes. And it seemed more like this person was trying to prove to themselves that they could get away with it, and they kept upping the ante and making it more difficult for themselves. And I think that's part of the choosing of different weapons and different methodologies, and going after victims that are in a pair, because obviously it's way harder to control a pair of human beings than one.
Right.
And so I think that was part of that personal challenge to him.
Now, with the second attack with Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau, was Mike Mageau ever able to, and I know this is kind of tipping your hand and you can, wait, and we can save this for other things, but did he ever get a good look enough that he kind of, when showed photos, he was like, yeah, that might be him? Or
from what I've heard, I believe he helped with some of those sketch artist drawings back in the day.
Right.
I'm not at liberty to discuss right now what any of the living victims.
That's what I figured.
Oh,
yeah,
come on.
Unfortunately, I know. You gotta wait for Dale's book.
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone.
It's more his story to tell,
We're not going to tell anybody.
Yeah, I know. Except your audience.
That's right. Well, and that's what I kind of figured, was that y'all, with the case breakers, I know that y'all are trying to dot every I and cross every T.
Yeah.
And so I think that really, with this being a case that no one really thought would ever be solved, being able to go and get them to kind of to look back and kind of, hey, does this look familiar? Does this sound familiar? And then also the 911 well, she wasn't really a 911 operator. She was a police dispatch. Now, is she still alive, or had she passed?
That's a good, I actually don't know the answer to that, to be honest. I would have to Google her and see if she's still alive. That's actually someone that name hasn't come up in our conversations, or what I know about what's been done behind the scenes. So I actually don't have a good answer for you on that. What I can tell you is we're taking more solid strides to connect them to these scenes than just eyewitness accounts.
Right.
I'll let you ask your question, and then we can get into that, or whenever, not trying to lead your conversation here.
Well, and then I'm just trying to go through each, you want to confirm. So we get to Lake Berryessa with Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. Were y'all ever able to, and you, again, you can tell me if you can't disclose it, I guess, what was the deal with the executioner's hood? Was it just, like you said, he's trying to up the ante and see what he can do? Or was it tied to, there's a lot being, and I'm kind of rambling and I apologize. There's been a lot tied to a lot of theories about he took his identity after a dark comic, or he took his symbol from the Zodiac watch. Do you think that played into it, or do you think he was just trying to prove how smart he really was, and so he could one up the authorities?
Well, so there's a couple aspects there that I'll address. One is the Zodiac symbol. So Gary Post was a radar man in the Air Force. That was his, I forget what it's called in the Air Force. In the Army, it's MOS. And he sat at a radar screen pretty much every day for his whole shift. So I personally believe that the Zodiac symbol is actually a radar screen. And part of the reason that I believe that is because if you look at how he signed with that symbol, the crosshairs, so to speak, don't end at the edge of the circle. like a
Right.
scope would, right? They
Right.
extend past. Well, a radar screen, yes, is a circle, and the lines technically, they physically end at the circumference of that circle, but in actual radar work, the lat and long go past the edge of that radar screen. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, that
And
makes
so
perfect.
I think that's what where the idea for his symbol and his signature came from, and I think that's why those so-called crosshairs extend past the edge of the circle in his signature every time. There's something else Zodiac related in his career, and that was when he was assigned to Greenland up on the distant early warning line at a radar station way up there. They were shipped up in the late 50s on a large cargo boat or whatever, which couldn't dock. So they would send out the small boats to, get the sailors and the airmen and whoever off this ship and take them to shore. And those boats were called Zodiac boats. And they were able to operate under the radar. So they're not detectable by radar. And so I think that also might have played into, he just liked that concept, and therefore he adopted, the Zodiac word, I guess, as you will, to be his, quote unquote signature, or his moniker, I guess would be a better word for it. Let's see, what was your other question? Oh, about
The executioner's
the suit.
hood. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't thought a lot about that aspect. I mean, we obviously know that he loved taunting authorities.
Right.
And I do think he probably got a thrill out of seeing the terror and fear in people before their deaths. And so obviously if you show up on a couple in a remote area that's completely not has
Right.
no idea that this is going to happen, you show up looking like that, it's probably going to invoke even more fear. And maybe that was part of his signature or whatever, that he just, and again, he may have just wanted to up the challenge, not only for himself but for authorities, like you said. He clearly found thrill in eluding authorities. So that, it could have something to do with that.
I have a couple of questions. Was it always thought maybe that we were dealing with a highly intelligent military guy? Was that a route that was taken in the beginning when people started first receiving these letters and notes and things, that when maybe we're dealing with a highly intelligent individual that was in the military? And then the other question is, did they go revisit any of those places that he was stationed in while he was in the military, and have any unsolved murders in those areas?
I do believe in the early days of the investigation that they concluded that this person had to have some wits about them, right? I mean, they have to be somewhat intelligent in order to put together even a rudimentary cryptogram or a cipher. So I do think authorities knew they were dealing with somebody who, it wasn't like a Richard Ramirez who's just basically out of control, right? This person was very calculated, and I think authorities realized that. And I'm sure they had to consider the fact that it might have been a military veteran. But in terms of their, specific investigation suspect, I can't speak to it because I just I don't have the time to do that kind of research, and
Sure.
it doesn't benefit us really at this point. So I haven't done it, but I have to imagine that they considered that, yeah. And then in terms of where he's been stationed, in terms of Greenland, no, there's no unsolved homicides up there that we know about. His Vandenberg, of course, there's some in the California area, yeah, Central California area. So we are still working to try to piece together other crimes that he may have committed, because I don't personally believe he only has 7 victims. No. I tend to believe that there's several more out there. And something that Tom Colbert realized is that in terms of known homicides attributed to Zodiac, and then a couple others that we think might be, it covers almost every year in the 1960s except 2. And if that's a pattern of his, then we believe he would have found more, another victim in those other 2 years. But so far we haven't figured out which homicides those might possibly be. But crowdsourcing has been good from that aspect, because there's people out doing research now and emailing us like, have you heard about this unsolved homicide? It seems to have some similar characteristics. And so that's been really helpful. But obviously until we get some more solid, like probably forensic or ballistics evidence, it's going to be hard to make those claims. And then his first duty station was Indiana. And I'd honestly have to go looking through some records to see if there's any unsolved homicides there. But me personally, I don't think that there will be. I think so. When he was stationed at Indiana, he was in a really horrific car wreck. It killed his passenger. Post was driving drunk and crashed the car, killed a passenger, fellow airman. He himself ended up in the hospital for months with a major traumatic brain injury, had brain surgery.
Would he have frontal lobe damage from that accident?
Absolutely.
Which could have triggered his onset into thrill killing.
Right. And that's something that I know about because I studied TBIs for my master's thesis. And so, yes, when you have a traumatic brain injury, it often affects your frontal lobe, which is, the word is appropriate because it's towards the front of your brain, but it's your decision-making area and your reasoning area of your brain, right? And so you've seen it with NFL players and even veterans, like they have major traumatic brain injuries. We've seen, unfortunately, some just engage in behaviors that they probably would not have before. And so we can't prove it, but it does make me wonder, did that traumatic brain injury and then his commander inflicted additional trauma on him by putting his wrecked car out front of the post or the Air Force base for everybody to see as they drove in and out every day, embarrassed him, and then punished him by sending him up to Greenland. So it's possible that combination of events changed his mindset in more ways than one. It's a recipe for
disaster.
Yeah, it totally could be. Set something off in him,
Now, I had heard that he had a personal connection to Paul Stein. Did y'all find anything with that?
Yeah. So something else to explain is the way that Dale Julin convinced me, or himself first, but then me, that he had the right guy is because he realized that all those taunting letters that had been sent to law enforcement and the media, they're actually anagrams. And an anagram is where you have to take all the letters in this message and then rearrange them to reveal the actual message the person wants to convey. And what Dale realized is that in all 18 taunting letters, in the last third, you can find the letters of Gary Francis Post. And I mean, this was just like a brilliant revelation on behalf of Dale, who's not into cryptology at all. He's a reporter on the news, but he just realized this one night and was like, I wonder if I take the letters of Gary's name out of this letter, and he started with the Halloween letter, what's left, And so he did that, and then he was able to rearrange the rest of the letters into another message that made sense. And I'm not going to reveal the exact details of his decryption because that is totally his work and his story to tell. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because in one of those decrypted letters, Gary Post, or Zodiac, I should say, states that the murder of Donna Lass was business. I'm sorry, the murder of Donna Lass was for fun, and the murder of Paul Stein was for business because Paul Stein had ripped him off and lied to him. And so that was one of the points in this manuscript where I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, how else can you explain these anagrams that Dale, we believe, has decrypted? So yes, and then Dale was able to trace back that Gary Post and Paul Stein had known each other and done some kind of business in the past, or actually, I think this may have been over a drug deal or something gone wrong, or money. But yes, he was able to trace that they knew each other.
Now, at the time, did he, there's that whole mix up with the dispatch when it's first reported. Did he fit that description that was sent by the party goers that were overlooking Paul Stein's murder? I know they stopped someone and said, hey, have you seen a African-American male? And he was like, yeah, he went that way or something.
Right.
But I guess my thing is, if he would have matched that description minus the African-American male, I mean, that's almost as good as, the smoking gun there, at least for Paul Stein.
Yeah. I forget the other details of that description. Of course, the main thing that we always remember is that they got the skin color wrong, which is right. What I guess assisted him in getting away, although it does sound like he was quite close to authorities when they showed up. I'd have to look back at the rest of what description was given to that dispatcher in order to tell you if it matched up. But I would obviously probably say yes, it did. It was at least close. But eyewitness accounts are so they're unreliable anyways too. So it's like,
Right.
I'm always a skeptic on eyewitness accounts, and like even the sketches that are out now and stuff, I'm like, that's not what we're going on, you know. Like there's a lot more behind this that at least it makes sense that he's the suspect.
You get into some of the unconfirmed killings where, and this would have been, you know, early 63, where it was Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. And I'm, you know, kind of loaded question, but I'm sure he was in the area with that too.
That was down Southern California area, right? Or
Yes.
Southern half of yeah. Because he was let's see, when did he get to Vandenberg? I want to say 61 time frame that he was at Vandenberg, and then for a couple more years at least, and then we know that he was receiving treatment at that hospital by Riverside in 66.
Right.
So
63,
he's down
he
in
right
that
there.
general area.
Yeah.
He's in
Okay.
that general area.
And then, you know, kind of circling back to the letters, when the couple kind of broke that first letter, he was able to use his anagram and go back and look at that one, and that one gave another message as well, didn't it?
So Dale has only worked on decoding the taunting letters that came in English, or that used English letters, that used the English alphabet, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Now, I can speak to the 340 cipher, which is the one that was cracked about a year ago by the three guys. And I do think they have it right. But the thing is, like, if you read it, what they cracked, it doesn't say much. Everybody's really disappointed because they're like, oh, we thought his name would be in there and all this stuff. Well, it is. It's got to be decoded one more time. And like, I urge people, please, to go try and do it because I know Dale and I are so sick of trying to do anagrams. But in that 340 cipher, and it's difficult because it's got 340 characters, and that's a lot to try to shift around, you know, into something else. But you'll find the letters of Gary Francis Post in the last third of it. And then in the first third, there's a song lyric, and that's part of his MO in all his letters. There's usually either a song title from the era or a song lyric. He was very much into theater and music. And I'm not going to tell what song lyric is up there, but you know, people over time can figure it out. But so it is matching up to his MO on the anagrams of the other letters, but we haven't completely decoded it yet. But we would be happy if someone would please do that. We're not trying to like stake claim on that or anything. Like, we're happy to use some crowdsourcing there to help out. So it's possible that the other ones that came in that were actually coded, you know, that weren't just using alphabet letters, it's possible that those need to be decoded again too. I tend to think on the very first one that the couple solved out of the newspaper that he didn't think it'd be as easy for someone to solve as it was. And so then I think that's when he upped the ante, was like, oh, okay, now that was too easy for you guys. So now I'm really going to try and get you.
And I guess that's another thing, you know, that had been sent to Quantico for, you know, that was one of theirs for years, is trying to get that cracked. And then, you know, those three guys, they had input all of that into that computer.
Yeah.
I guess kind of moving, we kind of touched on the victims. What were y'all able to find? You know, he wrote those letters about he was going to start picking off kids and he was going to put landmines. Was there any validity that he took steps to make that a reality, or was that him just being braggadocious?
It was him bragging, but also, again, those are letters where you have to rearrange it all. And Dale has done that with about half or maybe a little over half of these taunting letters so far. And the one that had caught Dale's attention when he started looking at Zodiac was the one about the kids on the school bus, the threats towards them, because he specifically remembered growing up in the Bay Area, he was on the school bus during this time and they had police escorts because of that taunting letter.
Right.
But he was able to crack that anagram and reveal the actual message, which had nothing to do with blowing up school buses. It was just the wording, the letters, whatever, worked out for him to be able to write the initial code that way. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. You know, there's those two postcards that he had sent. There was one, I think they call it the Pace postcard, where it's got the holes on the side. Is that an anagram as well? I guess you kind of, it is. Okay.
Yeah, they all are.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask.
I think that's the 13 punch card or the Peek
Yeah.
Through the Trees card. I forget which one, but
the 13
Yeah.
punch card. Yeah.
yeah, Dale has decoded those. And again, I'm not going to give like the specific decryption, but 3 of the taunting letters that Dale decrypted led him to what we believe is an evidence site in the High Sierras where Donna Lass's body had initially been disposed of. Gary Post was very much into, like I said, he was a survivalist. He was very good at navigation. And when you decode these letters, it gives you specific directions and, north, south, and lat long. It's more complicated than that. But Dale, in decoding those 3, was able to follow the directions up to the specific location in the High Sierras. And lo and behold, in front of him was this tree that had been described in the code as being it's a tree trunk that starts as one and then it separates into 2 trunks and then twists back together. So it's a very unique looking tree.
Yeah.
And that matched the description. Zodiac in the letter, once it's decrypted, had said that he had hung the bones of Donna Lass in a bear cache 40 feet up that specific tree. So once Dale found the tree, he went and found a painter with a 40-foot ladder, and sure enough, 40 feet up the tree is hardware that's embedded in the tree.
Dang.
Now, obviously, the bear cache and her body is no longer there.
Correct.
And, he may have come and retrieved it. I still think that we can find her body. Like, that is on my list of goals.
Right.
I think maybe some of the later letters, once they're decoded, will have clues about where he actually buried her body or what he did with it. We're just not there yet. But to me, that was a turning point, a huge turning point in that manuscript, because I was like, you can't explain this any other way. I mean, the directions he specifically gave once you decode them takes you right there. And
Right.
everything matches up with his measurements and everything else. So I could not explain that away.
There's just a couple more things, and then you can hit what we've missed. But the Halloween postcard, I know that at one time they had tried to remove the pumpkin and see if the pumpkin played a role in it. And then the envelope, and then inside the card, there was something else. I mean, I guess once he realizes those anagrams are going on, when he looks at those, you're not going to be able to look at something mundane, I guess, is my thing. You're always trying to find that hidden meaning.
Mhm.
And then there's that Through the Trees card, that one's kind of odd. There was a History Channel show, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that
Yeah.
they thought they had found up there where that neighborhood was at, or a neighborhood was built in that area. So, it would make sense, like you said, that if he was such a great outdoorsman, he would know the terrain and how that terrain looked, and then kind of match it up to that postcard. Were there any specifics off of those that led him to something else? I mean, you don't have to disclose it, but were there, did that disclose things that kind of further solidified that he's definitely on the right track?
I think so. It is pretty amazing to me that one human being could create some of these cards and anagrams themselves, but I do believe that this guy was capable of it. One example I can think of where you have to look at more than just the letters even is like, you look at the stamps on the accompanying envelopes, and sometimes those hold a clue to what's in the anagram in that particular message. So on one of the envelopes, there's an Apollo 9 stamp, I think it is.
Yeah.
And in the accompanying card, once you crack the anagram, there is a quote from the Apollo 9 crew in that anagram. So there's like additional clues that, if you can interpret them properly, will help you decrypt all of these haunting letters and figure out the correct message or the actual message that he was trying to convey. But it gets complicated, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
it hurts my head sometimes.
I could just imagine, just trying to figure, and then trying to not second guess yourself. Did I do it right? Did I not do it right? I guess the other thing with him, there had been theories put forth by a lot of people that felt like that he continued to write the press to stay in the press. But at the same time, you had Manson and that whole trial and the killings.
Mm-hmm.
Was he smart? I guess, for lack of a better word, confident enough that he was okay just writing the letters and kind of taunting to keep himself alive, or keep his name in the press? Or did he feel like, hey, I've really gotten away with this and I'm kind of going to back off?
It could be a combination of both. I mean, it's hard to tell without being able
Right.
to talk to him, which we can't. But I definitely think he got a thrill out of seeing his letters, you know, in the newspaper and articles about him. And I think he loved living this dual lifestyle, if you will, and having this very introverted, I guess you could call it public persona that his neighbors and a few family members knew and a couple friends or whatnot, but then having this entire other life. I mean, I think that was probably one of the biggest thrills to him. And so of course, every time his name is mentioned or he sends another letter and gets the media all riled up, you know, it's a reminder to him of this other life that he's getting away with, and yet he's probably sitting down and having a drink with his neighbor at night, and this guy obviously has no idea
clue.
who he's talking to. Yeah,
right.
and I think he loved that. I really do.
Do you think he kept trophies, or do you think he was smart enough to kind of get rid of like the executioner's hood and the gun and the?
Well, okay, so there's something interesting that occurred on that recently. So we put out our initial press release October 6th, and we didn't want to publicize all of our work this way, but we were at a dead end with law enforcement. And so we felt like we had tried everything else and we didn't have much choice. So the best thing that's come out of that press release so far is several people from Gary Post's little town that he lived in the High Sierras have come forward saying, oh, he was my neighbor, or he painted my house, because he had a house painting business. I knew him in some form or fashion. Well, there's one guy up there who Gary Post gave him over 1,000 spent shell casings that he picked up after going into the woods and doing his target practice, which he loved to do. This neighbor of his, this guy, he did metalworking, he does metal art. And so Gary Post had given him all these shell casings saying, hey, you could melt them down, right? And like use them for your metal art. And the guy said, yeah, absolutely. You know, that would be great. So he got this huge container of shell casings and then never did anything with it, thankfully.
Yeah, I was about to say that would have been
So
awful if he had melted those down.
But what a brilliant way for Gary Post to get rid of all those, you know? And so this guy came to us after that press release and was like, so I have like 1,200 shell casings from Gary Post, and I have these containers of gunpowder, and there's some other items that I can't divulge yet, but he's like, are you guys interested in that? I'm like, yes, please.
Right.
So Tom Calder and his wife, you know, on their own dime, drove up there, and we talked extensively ahead of time about how to properly collect this, because law enforcement won't do it, and we're not law enforcement, right? So I told them, you start the video from before you even walk up to this guy's door and keep it running until you get back in the car, and you video everything of this turnover. So the guy signed an affidavit. There was a notary there that notarized it. It's all on video. Everybody's in gloves and masks and hairnets, and got the parchment paper down to collect any trace evidence that might fall off these items, and so on and so on. And so I think they did the absolute best they could to properly collect this evidence and create a chain of custody. And so what we've done is we've sent off some of those casings and other items to 3 different forensic labs. Again, this is at our own cost, law enforcement. We're paying out of pocket to have this testing done. But we've got evidence at 3 different labs across the country now, and we're working on some DNA extraction and ballistics reports. And then our hope is that we can present our findings to law enforcement that we know has evidence from some of these unsolved Zodiac scenes, and that they'll finally at least take this on a silver platter and do the comparison that we've been asking them to do.
Right.
So that's the step we're at right now. And that's, I mean, I'm like anxious, very, very anxious, but very excited to see the outcome and see where this leads, because, you know, if his DNA goes in CODIS, I mean, who knows? We could get a match right there. Because
right. And then,
like I said, there somebody may have an unsolved homicide that they had a DNA profile from that's in CODIS and never got a match. But aside from that, I think ballistics might be the next best thing, or might be the best thing really, to link him to some of these crime scenes. So but it's a waiting game right now while we wait on the lab.
And how ideal is it?
When you say out of pocket, I mean, how do you guys raise your funds? I'm sorry to get us sidetracked, but that just, I found that curious.
Our bank accounts.
Oh, wow. So you're like literally out of your own pocket.
Yeah. we do take donations. We haven't really solicited, we haven't asked for any. We have had people since October 6th that have donated small amounts, which is great. I don't care if it's $1 or $10, it doesn't matter, it all helps. And we're just putting that all in a fund right now until we decide what's the best way to, I guess, distribute that money or utilize that money. None of us takes a salary. We don't get paid for any of this. Obviously, we'd like to pay ourselves back for the lab costs, which is we're at about $4,000 right now for those. Not to mention the time and, Tom and his wife driving up from LA 8 hours each way, having to get a hotel room, using FedEx, of course, overnight. There's just all these costs kind of add up, but this is how much we believe in it, and this is how much we want answers. And the thing is that even if we end up being wrong, it's still an answer, and it's still forward progress, in my opinion. It's like, okay, well, if we can rule this guy out, fine, then we can move on to other suspects. So that's ultimately what we're after here, is just answers in the case.
Correct.
I was just going to say, what an ingenious way for him to keep a trophy, to take it to have somebody melt the shell casings
right?
If people was murdered. Nobody would ever know, and he would have that. That's so crazy.
I know. And there's even some weapons parts that he turned over this guy too, and we retrieved those as well. So again, we're working on acquiring the right ballistics expert who's willing to help us do this examination of all that stuff. So
I was just going to say, do we think the 37 number is a fair number, or is that just him bolstering his stats in the media?
Well, here's the thing. That guy loves codes and navigation and all this stuff. And I told Dale, I was like, the 37 could actually be another. It was actually my husband that noticed it. He's like, well, when you write lat long or whatever it is as a radar man on the paper, if the number goes out to the side like that, I guess this is not my area of expertise. And he's like, that could actually be like a navigational clue to something. And so, but we're not, yeah, I know.
It's like, who knows?
Everything I think is
Right.
a clue with this guy.
That's what I was about to say, because you're sitting there and you're like, oh yeah, well, 37. And then you get to like out of the blue, I would have never thought. And I was looking while you were talking at that Halloween postcard. There is so much stuff on just that postcard. If you look at the postcard, what's inside, like you said, the stamp, and then on the inside of the envelope, I think he wrote, sorry, no cipher this time, or something like that. But you don't know. You can't take him for his word, because it's like the whole thing. It's a game to him. How many times can I thumb my nose at the authorities and dangle my true identity in there? And, and going back to what Rob had talked about with the frontal lobe, is it one of those things where he was above average intelligence, and then after this, some wires got crossed, but it made him able to really be able to do this? This is just my crazy brain working, but
no,
because I don't think an average person would think to take a postcard and use that with different anagrams, kind of like, he's wired different. And then, like you said, he turns around and has a painting business after, all these years. So, that's crazy.
It is.
And that's what fascinates me. Like, he's not a recluse like Eric Robert Rudolph, or he's not a recluse like Kaczynski. He's out in the open. He's socializing with people. He's got relationships with people. So he's an anomaly. He's something different.
Yeah. I will say he was not, although he did get married to a woman, he did not seem to be into romantic relationships or dating at all. The more we find out about his life, the more it seems like that marriage was almost just like a cover for him to make him look a little more normal.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think he was asexual, or just?
It sounds like it, because this woman that he married, she's been talked to, and they never consummated their marriage. She said they never held hands. There's no photos of them, no kind of PDA. Obviously, he never had any kids of his own. So it almost sounds like he was. And I hate to say it, but it's also with a traumatic brain injury, could have caused him to not,
right,
just not be able to have sex. So, or just lose total interest.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in terms of his planning for this, he was stuck up in Greenland for at least 2-3 years. And if you talk to airmen or anybody who's been stationed up there, which we have, they say it's just the absolute most boring place on earth. and there's just nothing to do, and you're staring at this radar screen all day. So it wouldn't surprise me if he somehow hatched this idea and put a lot of it in place in his head, at least, prior to leaving that duty station. And something else I think has to be considered is that some of these taunting letters, I think he might have written before he actually committed the crimes. And
that's what I was going to ask you.
Another level of challenge to himself to go find a victim or victims that fit what he had written in his letter. Because some of them are mailed like the next day. And I'm like, you can't, I don't care how smart you are. I don't know if you can come up with that just overnight.
No, that's what I was about to say, because he would have to be, genius level at that point to be able to write the letter and then have already understand how to put the cipher in there. So you're right. I mean,
yeah,
makes a lot more sense with the randomness of the couples too.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's what, everybody is looking for, that the motive and stuff like that. I think what terrorized and even will like chill people to this day, and the reason this case resonates through the years is, like you said, if he did write those letters, it's just total randomness. It's like I think there was the Jacksonville Ripper back in the late 70s. He, it just, whatever, he was walking down the street or he happened to peeped in this window and saw a lady. I mean, if you didn't close your blinds that night or you didn't I think that's what really terrifies a lot of people, is they want the boogeyman, but they want the boogeyman to have predetermined
parameters. Yeah, exactly. Like Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
Like his victims, most of them look very similar to one another. He obviously had a type. I think it almost makes people feel slightly better when that happens, rather than, like you said, like completely random crimes. A single person, a couple, Caucasian, old, young, whatever, like didn't seem to matter to him.
I mean, going back to that first, well, not the first killing, the second killing, when he said that the car pulled in and kind of checked him out and then left and then came back. I mean, that right there, I think that adds validity to your statement about he may have had that letter done.
Yeah. And something else about the letters, we've been told by somebody else that knew him that he had his own, what's it called? A postal
machine?
Basically where you can stamp, the postal stamp.
Right.
I guess companies nowadays still have that, but like he apparently owned one of them himself. And so he could dictate what numbers or what date went into that stamp. And on some of those envelopes, those numbers become really important. But yeah, it's just like another layer of his onion of a brain. It's like, oh my God.
I was going to say, I mean,
it's above mine at my level.
It's crazy. And it's way above mine because we didn't go over your pedigree, but I mean, for you to be on this Case Breakers thing. Sorry, Rob, go ahead. I totally forgot. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say, do you think maybe the letters were like a stopwatch for him or a timer? He's like, this is in the mail and I've got to do that. That's his challenge. It pushes.
Adds another challenge.
To create it, to murder somebody.
I could totally see that. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I would not put that past this guy at all. You might totally be right on that. It's just like, okay,
that makes a lot of sense.
All right, man, I've set it all up for myself.
Yeah, it's in the mail. Somebody's got to go. Yeah,
absolutely, for sure.
I know we're kind of all over the place, but that's our
good.
podcast. But
we can't help it.
Yeah, we can't. Going back to the Lake Berryessa, when he wrote that on that door, I guess now I'm thinking, like, is that an anagram? Is there?
It is.
It is. Oh God.
Yeah, Dale decoded that one. Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy.
I
mean, and it's kind of like one of those things, and we talked about it on an episode one time about how you get predisposed with, like, if a red car cuts you off, all of a sudden 10 minutes later, all you see are red cars.
Sure.
Like, I would hate to be Dale. Now I'm looking at everything trying to be like, now I've got to look at this. Is this legit on face value? Do I have to rearrange everything? Man, my head, I don't know if I could have done. I mean, hats off to him, because I mean, that would drive me crazy.
Yeah, it has. I asked him, I talked to him a couple weeks ago about an idea. I was like, hey, Dale, what if we get on and make a YouTube video explaining your process? Like, we don't have to reveal the answers you came up with to the other letters, but it's easy enough to explain your process and try to crowdsource the solving of the 340 cipher, because it's so massive, And I said, or are you wanting to do that yourself. And he was just like, if I never see another anagram again in my life, it will be too soon. So, but yeah, he is over it. But of course, we want to solve all of them because
Right.
there's going to be way more clues in these other ones that he hasn't got to yet. And I still believe one may hold the location of Donna Lass's body, and we would really like to find her and at least, bring her home and get some resolution in that case. So we're going to keep working towards that. And like I said, I encourage listeners to do their own work on it and just, take the letters of Gary Francis Post out of each one and then work on rearranging the rest. But where Dale really became brilliant is he knows the MO, assuming that he's right, and I think he is, but he knows the MO of the person who did all these anagrams. It's like the song title thing, right? You would never think to look for that, but it's in there's a song title or a lyric in every one that Dale has decoded. So that's just part of the pattern that you have to learn over time and how the guy speaks. And then you have to remember, like, okay, so when he spells the word paradise, he misspells it, right? He uses a C instead of an S. Well, that's because he needs the C for Francis, his middle name. So you have to keep that in mind as well, is that when you decode it, not everything may be spelled absolutely perfect. In fact, in one of the letters, instead of the word icy is there, and instead of it being ICY, it's ICEE. But that's how, it's just what he had to do in order
To make it work.
to get it to work. Yeah, it's not 100% like this perfectly, beautifully written paragraph. So you really have to get inside his head and know his interests and his likes, and then start learning about the patterns that he used in all of these too.
And that just adds another layer to how, and I hope, for y'all's sake that this comes true, but that just adds another layer to how wrong most everybody was when they were, because they were thinking he's, middle intelligence, he's misspelling these words, it's showing a lack of intelligence. So, but he's showing a huge step of intelligence by purposely misspelling so that his anagram works.
Yeah.
It's just, God, that's crazy. But
indeed. And going back to some of those details, by the way, there's a dripping pen card. And if you look real close, I think next to the pen, it's a film reel, like with the little squares of a film reel. And Dale strongly believes that is a huge clue. He actually believes that if someone would take a black light to the original of that there would actually be an invisible message on there. And that, because in some of his decoded anagrams, there was clues about needing an ultraviolet light and stuff to unveil the whole dripping pen card clue or something like that. So he thinks that little film reel is a clue about that. And also we know that he loved film and theater and all that. So it's just another clue to his identity as well.
What music was he listening to? Like, can you tell us any of the lyrics, or what was he?
I remember like something from Bye Bye Birdie, but I think that's a musical, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd have to go back and look at the manuscript. I can't remember the other one.
So if it was the Grateful Dead, we would have, we could right now,
I would give up.
It's earlier than that because he was using stuff from the 50s and 60s. I guess the Grateful Dead did come around then, but he was more into like the theater type songs. And
again, kind of flaunting his intelligence.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Absolutely.
This has been such I jumped down this rabbit hole. I started teaching about an hour one way from my house. And so I started listening to podcasting. The people that did the Atlanta child murders first started with the Zodiac, and they were 30 or 40 minutes. And so I was, eyeball deep. I was listening to all of it. But now I'm kind of like, man, all of those preconceived thoughts that I came up with a couple of years ago have just been thrown out the window.
It was the same for me too. This is a really unique case because you almost needed to work it backwards like Dale did, which isn't how you investigate a homicide. You start with the crime scene and all that stuff and see where the evidence leads you. But really in this case, you had to do it backwards, and you couldn't figure this out without knowing Gary's name because that's the cipher key to each anagram. And I'm really tired of seeing this online, but yes, you can find the letters of anybody's name in most of these messages, right? You can find Jen Bucholtz in there. Okay, fine, but that doesn't leave you with the right combination of letters to get the message he's trying to convey. Like, it's not about just being able to find the letters of his name. It's what you do with the rest that are left over that's important. And I think for some reason there's a lot of people missing that fact.
Right. I think that's a huge key for listeners to, and just the general public to keep in mind, is that he did his due diligence by taking his name out and then rearranging, and it came up with these specific things.
Yeah.
And then, and another thing is, for any, I guess, the naysayers out there, pick a name that your favorite, suspect.
Yeah.
And if you pull him out and you come up with an anagram, then, that's
please
even better.
Send it to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because maybe it's right. I mean, it's not a competition here. Like, we're just trying to get answers at this point and get this over with, because we want to move on to other cases, to be honest. I mean, every victim deserves justice, and we want Zodiac victims to have justice and answers. But most of us are working on other cases that we're knee deep in, and would like to just get some resolution here. But and by the way, in some of the letters, punctuation is very important too. So if there's a period or an apostrophe, don't throw that away. Don't throw it away. You need to use it.
Man.
It'll be used. Yeah.
So that's on you, buddy.
And there will be nothing left over. That's the other thing. So you can take my name out of a letter and probably rearrange it into something, but you'll probably have some leftover letters. That's not correct. Like, the way Dale has decoded them, it uses every single letter. So that's just another reason why I think he's correct, because there's no other way to turn those into a usable message.
Right. And wasn't the first cipher, there was that jumbled up at the bottom when they deciphered, when they broke that code, they had that, was it 16 or 13 letters?
I think it's a 13. I have a theory on that.
Go for it, because my mind's been blown.
Like, I worked on that for a while, and then my head hurt, so I put it aside. But so if you look at the letters of Gary Francis Post, there's 13 letters used in his full name. 3 of them are used twice. So it was like, is that the connection to those 13 symbols? And I was trying to figure it out, but then I got really sidetracked because one of the symbols is his little Zodiac signature, and I was like, well, if I take that out as his signature, then I'm left with 12 symbols, and you can see where I went down the rabbit hole, and then got a headache. So
yeah.
But that was my train of thought on that one, but I don't know what the solution is at this point. So I would love if somebody would help us with that too.
I'm on it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, including the documentary, please. Because that is coming up. Like, we did, after that press release, we got inquiries from, I think it was 13 or 14 different networks wanting to sign for a documentary. That is way out of my wheelhouse. I don't control any of that. That's Tom Colbert's. But we're on a short timeline now, because once he signs that contract, which is probably sometime next week, then we're under a media blackout and I can't talk about it anymore. So that's why I was really glad that you guys were available today to discuss this.
Yeah, guys, do y'all have anything? I was just going to touch on, just the case breakers in general.
The last thing I wanted to ask, I just kind of wanted to circle back around to Paul Stein. So somebody said there was an African-American male in the area.
I think the dispatcher misinterpreted that.
Okay, I was just curious because that's the same, it's the same year as the Manson murders. And so they were using that to try to start a race war, saying it was African-Americans that went in and killed the LaBiancas and Sharon Tate and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. I didn't know if that was kind of like, hey, I'm going to throw this in there to stir the pot. So,
I wouldn't put it past them, actually. But my understanding is that the eyewitness who called stated they saw a Caucasian male, if I'm correct, but somehow through the game of telephone, it turned into an African-American guy. I don't know how that happened, but I mean, even law enforcement has said Paul Stein is connected to Zodiac because, as you know, he cut a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt and mailed it in. So we know that he was at that crime scene. So it has been confirmed to be one of his victims. It's just a matter of confirming the perpetrator.
Right. touching on and we kind of did this backwards, but how did you get involved with Case Breakers? Was it through this case or?
Yeah, it was through the Zodiac case. And then, once Tom and I got to know each other and he learned about my background and me working on other unsolved homicides, he offered me up to be a member of the team. So I wasn't going to turn that down.
No, that's awesome.
It's really cool. Like, I've made some really awesome connections with other former investigators. I mean, not everybody's former, some are still current in law enforcement, but we have, retired FBI agents on our team. We have a world-renowned medical examiner, forensic pathologist on our team. Like, we have some incredible resources, and combined, it's hundreds, if not thousands of years of experience between everybody. So it's been
I think
great.
that's what makes y'all so, unique, is there's kind of that laser focus. You want to find and solve murders and kind of check your egos at the door and kind of let each person in their own specific field run with that avenue of the investigation and come back and discuss it. And I think that's great. And without divulging too much, what can you say about the other cases that y'all have kind of looked at? Are there just some small time cases, or are they more high profile? Or
I mean, as a whole, Case Breakers is looking, you probably saw the website, like Hoff is up there and the Atlanta child murders. I'm privy to some of what's going on with those, but that's not my personal focus. Like, I focus on more, low profile, less known murders. And so you guys know about the Rebecca Gould murder, and I worked on that with George Jared for a couple years. And then finally a year ago, there was an arrest, but we're waiting on trial for that guy. And so we had a bunch of downtime. So I was like, hey, George, we did pretty good on the last one. You want to team up again and work on another one? And he said, hell yeah. So we presented at CrimeCon this year on Rebecca's case. And then while we were there, we met a woman named Liz, who's the sister of a murder victim out of Lubbock, Texas. And we talked with her extensively, and it was just me and George kind of looked at each other like, this is the next one. I don't know what it was. It was like, this is the next one we're going to work. And so we've been working that one since about July. And the university I work for, AMU, rebranded one of their podcast channels for us.
That's awesome.
And turned it into a true crime investigative podcast. And so we're in the middle of the season of, it's called Break the Case, and it's on most podcast platforms. And episode 5 will be out next week. So that tells you how far we are into the podcast season. But I think we've made a ton of good headway on that case. And my thing is I work one case at a time. Like, I can't, like, it's been very difficult to juggle Zodiac with trying to focus on Debbie's case. I don't mind doing it, but I like to just stay focused on one case at a time, so I don't get confused and all that. And so we're working towards a vision of creating more teams like me and George around the country, like 2 or 3 person teams of people who work really well together, but have different skill sets that complement each other. It's like, I'm former Army and into forensics and stuff, and he's an investigative journalist, but he's covered homicides for 20 years, and he's a true crime author and stuff. So we have different skill sets, but that go together well. Yeah. So we're trying to establish more volunteer teams around the country of people that want to do that, just focus on one case at a time. But it's a process, because you have to vet everybody that wants to volunteer, and then assess their willingness. There's some weeks I work 40 hours on Debbie's case, and we don't get paid anything for it. I don't get paid to podcast or write or any of that. So, we have to find people who, they don't necessarily need to put in that many hours, but like, who are going to stick with it in the long run and not get bored.
Correct.
So if you guys, or anybody is interested, like, please just go to the website and send us an email, and we'll get on the phone with you and chat. And it'd be great to have other people out there with investigative skills, or like you, podcasting connections, whatever that can be useful. So that's the direction we're trying to head.
And that's great, because really this podcast area, that's one thing that, Coach and I have talked about, and then we've also talked about it with Rob, is this is one of the best communities for sharing information and things like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, and then just like you said, I think the same lady that kind of turned you on to Rebecca's case kind of contacted us too. And she's been great. She's, she really, entrusted us to do a good job with that case. And I feel like, Rebecca's case needed a lot more than we two could give. It was, I mean, for it to be to have a break, you know, and arrest that guy. And I would love to have you back on and us go through that whole case again.
Sure.
'Cause I know that's another probably hour of just dissecting everything that lovely individual has done. But so I guess the big question now is for our listeners and anybody really, how can we help the case breakers? How can we donate? Is there a donate button? Is there, you know, a source, you know, GoFundMe page or?
So if you go to the website, it's thecasebreakers.org. You can find everything there. There is a donate button, but you can also find our YouTube channel, and I would encourage listeners to subscribe to that channel because we're putting together content currently that's going to go up there. I have a few videos up there actually relevant to Rebecca's case, and I think one for Debbie's. But George and I recorded on Saturday a video going over how he got involved in Rebecca's case, and then this Saturday we're recording a second half of that of how he and I came together. And we're hoping that serves as some inspiration for, you know, people that want to help us and kind of replicate our process, I guess, and help us solve some of these murders in our country.
Right.
So there'll be more and more content coming up on the YouTube channel if they want to subscribe to that. And then Case Breakers is on Twitter and Facebook. You know, it's on all the social media if you want to follow us there. And then I have my own YouTube channel. My handle is Jen Bucholtz, PI, and it's the same as my Twitter handle. And some of our content overlaps, but I also have obviously some other individual stuff too. People are interested in that. And I mean, and then you can find the Case Breakers email link on the website too. So if you have any questions or you just want to reach out or, you know, be one of these support personnel that we can call on once in a while, like if we need a, you know, a medical expert to look at an autopsy report, or, you know, you don't have to like be involved all the time, but we like having people, volunteers that we can call on occasion for specific assistance like that. So if anybody has a skill like that they want to offer up, please, you know, reach out. Again, like you guys just spreading the word on your podcast is fantastic. So we're headed in a good direction, I think. I feel good about it.
Well, I'm glad. And you know, anytime we can help, you know, bring light to some of these smaller cases, we really do appreciate,
absolutely,
you know, trying to just get people talking about it. And I think that's, you know, Coach and I have talked about on a couple of our episodes, you know, the latest one we did was the Springfield 3. And I think the Springfield 3 needs a fresh set of eyes, kind of like, you know, Rebecca's case got a fresh detective in there. And, you know, and I listened to your, not to take away from an upcoming interview with you, but I listened to your Diamond State Murder Board episode where they found the business card from the detective, and I got chills, and I told Rob about it.
I cried.
Yeah. I mean, I teared up, and I was like, you know, for him, and I told my wife, we were sitting here one evening, and I said, for him to do that and know that it probably would never be seen. I mean, that just speaks volumes to what kind of person he is.
Exactly. And he works a couple that from that cemetery. So, I mean, he went way out of his way to go deliver that. Like, that literally made me cry when we found that on her headstone. I mean,
that's phenomenal. And I mean,
it is.
For him to, you know, for him to be on it in so little time and then to have a huge break like that. I mean, that's what some of these cases need. And kind of like, you know, like you said, you just need some people to get some fresh eyes on stuff and ask some questions, you know, that may not have been asked. So
right. Yeah, we actually got, after the press release, we got 3 emails about the Springfield 3 case. And I had heard the Springfield 3 podcast before that, but I saw those emails and it did pique my interest because it was from 3 separate people who I don't think know each other. And I was like, well, maybe we don't normally do missing persons, but maybe we could find some volunteers to team up in that area and try to do something, and like maybe team up with you guys since you know about it now. And I don't know, we can discuss that
anytime we can help. I mean, we definitely, you know, are willing to do whatever we can to get some ideas out there and do follow-ups with, you know, even just some new leads, you know, little short episodes like that. But
absolutely.
I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day and speaking.
Oh, for sure.
With us.
It's my pleasure.
And, you know, I can't thank you enough. The generosity you showed when we were researching Rebecca's case, you know, it showed me that you really you just wanted answers. And I think that
Yes.
that spoke volumes. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely, anytime. And if you end up with follow-up questions, please reach out again, and I'm happy to come back on, or at least give you the information that, to try to answer your question and present. So be around. But yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, I would love to.
I would love to pick your brain on the child murders in Atlanta. That
Oh
would
God,
be-
yeah. We
Yeah.
Off an episode, we just like huddle around because I've got a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I would love to hear it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because like you see, it's on our website. So
Yeah.
any information about that, we'd love to hear.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you got anything?
You know I don't.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you guys for having me on. Hopefully we'll chat soon.
All right,
Happy
thank you.
holidays.
Have a great day. Thanks.
Well, that concludes our episode with Jennifer Bucholtz. Hopefully you found it as informative as the coach, Rob, and I did. Again, we cannot thank her enough for taking the time out of her busy day to speak with us. If you would like to help the Case Breakers, please visit their website, click on that donate button, and show some love. Well, ladies and gentlemen, deuces.